right, perfect. Thanks everyone for joining. This is, I think, the first time that we do this kind of an open office hour, but I've seen all these names before, which I think is a very good sign. Hopefully, maybe some other people will join us later or are watching this asynchronous, which is also totally okay and promoted. The topic of today, or the open office hours of today, is the contributor success work within GitLab, but also maybe more to have like an open town hall on what is this team doing, what could we do better, what are we working on, because ultimately we're here for the wider community, and if we're not advocating for the wider community, we're doing something wrong, right? So we're trying to figure out, like, is it clear what this team does? Is it clear what our goals are? And maybe open up some room for questions or even discussions. There is a document that I think was linked in the meetup event. I'm not sure if everyone has access to that, if you'd like to join, or is that open for all?
It should be open for all. I'll just drop the link in the Zoom chat in case anyone hasn't got it.
I think everyone should also be able to edit, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So feel free to add your own name or link to your GitLab account there, or whatever you want to share. I don't know, Lee, like in these open office hours, like, do you do like a round table on like who's here? Or
we haven't really done to date from memory. I think it's, yeah, let's dive in with the AMA, yeah, and give people an opportunity. I guess you want to summarize a little bit what the team does, Nick, for those that, although we've got a very familiar crowd, I guess the recording could be viewed by anyone, so you might want to do a quick intro.
Yeah, and maybe I'll share my screen so I can loop you through the handbook page. So as you know, the contributor success and everything else within GitLab is documented in the handbook. It's under marketing, developer relations, and a contributor success team. Currently, we're 4 people, and we're working with the wider community and on a couple of items. We follow the open source growth strategy, which I think is very interesting for those that are curious to understand like how GitLab does open source and why we do open source and why we believe that committing to open source and driving these contributions actually also helps the company move forward. So there's this, with more contributions, we can scale with outreach, we can scale the community, contribution velocity, and etc. But if you go a little deeper, you can see that on a company strategy, it means that if there is more contributions, there's more features, there's more users, then there's more revenue, and then like there's like this dual flywheel. So that's like a very high level view on like why we also really believe that it's important for the company itself. The growth strategy, and I'll try to be quick so that there's enough room for questions and discussions. It has like 4 pillars. Like, one is that we want to improve the contribution velocity, which means that if people submit something, they should not wait for like 6 months to get feedback. Ideally, these like feedback loops are quick, so that it's like a happy journey that you get for this contribution. We can do that by reducing the MR rate, simplifying the contribution guides, which Nico here, for example, is working on as a Google Summer of Code project, contribution tooling, etc. Then there's also a bunch of work happening within the team on contribution value. And then that's a little bit of a tricky section because everyone has different reasons why they would contribute. So if you look at it from 2 ways, there's intrinsic values and extrinsic values from why someone would do that. Intrinsic means is because you believe you're adding something for the greater good, and it's because you really believe that it's doing something good. Extrinsic, for example, is a hackathon. People contribute because they get a gift, which is a very clear like transaction in a way. This goes quite in depth, and there's like multiple things that we could do there. Both is from developer badges and certifications to recognition, like the Heroes program, MVPs, and other programs, to figuring out like how could someone even advance in their career. Because they contribute to GitLab, they are maybe more likely to get hired in a higher paying role ultimately, but that's a bit harder to prove. So that's all that work there. Then there is expand outreach. This is the events, going to office hours. You can see this was part of the strategy, but only since Lee got really frustrated and says, we have to do this, he actually took action, buys for action, and we're having these office hours now, even though I think this was on this page already for like a year or even 2 years. So I think that's great that we're doing this right now. But there's more social presence, scale these events, and figuring out like how to expose our backlog, or figuring out how to link people with certain items. So that's that. And then the last part is scale the community. And I think the most important part for this team is this returning and frequent contributors. If we spend so much effort in getting someone to contribute to GitLab, and that person only comes by once, it's a lot of effort for a single contribution from a single person. So ideally, you want to motivate a person to come back, to make a feeling of a belonging, to make a feeling of a community, so that there is this returning and frequent contributors, so that also the effort spent in attracting that person and making sure that that first contribution is successful is also resulting in more later on, so that you can scale up, as in like that, it's like a cumulative effect. So that's a bit what I believe is really important there. All the other items are also important. For example, governance model, making sure that we follow the code of conduct, making sure that it's a safe environment, inclusive environment. Like without any of that, you will probably also not attract people. So it's an and story. So that's a bit of the open source growth. I think everything that this team does is within that frame. If you look at it more practically, what we're doing right now is like we take a couple of these pieces and we try to make an impact in a couple of these items. If you want to understand more on what we do, for example, specific programs like the leading organizations that's trying to convince customers to contribute, sometimes successful, sometimes completely not. These are like attempts or tactics for that strategy. I'll stop there because maybe I've been talking a lot already, and maybe open the floor for a couple of questions if anything that I said was not clear.
I've got a question. That was super helpful also, by the way, because I've interacted with lots of people on the team, but I didn't really know specifically what the things folks are looking at and the projects that people are working on. But I'd be curious to know how many contributors are just people who are doing it because of their own volition, and how many people are actually part of an organization or work for a company that are contributing upstream in their daily work.
It's an amazing question, and the question itself is also something that we're trying to answer. It is hard because we don't require people to explain why they're contributing, or if you look at it, like if they're actually being paid to contribute by an organization, or if they're doing it from an individual perspective. There is a field in the profile which is called organization. It's a text field, and you could fill it in, but you could also not fill it in. But even if it's filled in, we don't know if you're at home and you're doing it by yourself, and you just happen to have this link with that company, or if you're actually doing it during your office hours because the company asked you to do so. So it doesn't really mean a lot. I'm hoping that at some point we are able to make a change in the product itself, so that you can identify yourself and saying, like, my organization asked me to do this and I'm doing this on a paying cadence or a paying time, or I'm doing this on a volunteering time with the same profile or your same GitLab profile. If today you feel it's really important that you want to make that difference, the only solution that I see is have two profiles. In a way that, for example, Lee has two profiles, one from GitLab and one personal. I think a couple of other people have that as well. But I'm not able to answer that question today, which is somewhat frustrating as well. Because what I do know from my previous experience is that if you can increase the amount of people that are being paid to contribute, because it's important for these organizations, they're also most likely to return, because then they're returning contributors because it's their day job. And not something that we ask on the side next to making food and taking care of babies or whatever you need to do from that personal time. Does that help, or did I completely avoid your question?
No, you helped shed some light on the difficulties of actually categorizing people. But a follow-up question I would have to that is, from a GitLab perspective, are you looking to, so you are looking to attract more companies and people who contribute as part of their job, or is the monthly goal of unique contributors also aiming to get individual people who just do it for the other reasons you listed, like career advancement or learning, etc.?
I think the main goal is to grow the community in both ways. But I believe, and this is my personal belief, that if it's more sustainable if these are people that are being paid to contribute. Because like the other flip side of attracting a lot of individuals on their free time is a burnout risk. So like, what can you ask from these people? What can you expect? You push a lot for the returning contributors. You may be pushing these people. They most likely have very high intrinsic values, as in like you really want to do good. You really want to go above and beyond. But there is a very high risk of burnout with these people that take up these responsibilities. For example, the core team of GitLab, I think most of them are individuals in their free time. I'm making an assumption here, but I believe that's today still the case. We have to be very careful what we ask from these people. And I think Lee has the better insight there in terms of the core team and expectations. But yeah, that's a balance that we have to figure out.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there and just say, even though if we don't have all the exact data on that question, Missy, I think anecdotally we can say that there is a number of top contributors and regulars, returners who are doing this of their own volition and are doing this because they want to contribute or they want to be a part of the community. And that's been very valuable to GitLab as a whole, to have that sort of drive from someone that just wants to contribute. But as Nick pointed out, the burnout is definitely a big fear, and finding ways to prevent burnout for the community is definitely a part of our team's goals as well, because we don't want contributors that are doing all the heavy lifting to feel that effect of doing too much of the job, and trying to scale the community to have extra support for everyone that's contributing too.
Any other questions from the introduction? Okay.
I've got one more question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I don't want to ask too many if other people have questions, but since you asked. So how many unique monthly contributors are there now? Like how far is GitLab from reaching that goal?
Last month, so in May, I think we had 110 unique code contributors that got something merged. And it's important to give that nuance, right? So the thing that today we count, and I'll explain a bit more about that, is people that open a merge request, so not necessarily even like add something to an existing merge request, and then get that merged in that month. And that's like 110 last month. The months before, the 3 months before that, were 113, if I recall correctly. If you look at how many people interact with merge requests itself, I think I need to take a look at the numbers, but it's higher. And if you look at like how many people interact with issues and merge requests like all together, that's about like 3,000. And then it's a big question, like what is the definition of a contributor, right? And that's a question that today I'm trying to maybe change a bit with within GitLab. What is the definition of a contributor? Or maybe we should call it contributor and a code contributor. I think we'll talk about it a bit later in the discussion or the live pairing with the proposal that I have is how do you capture the value of non-code contributions? Like how do you figure out how to also consider those people equal? For example, accessibility reviews or like anything that's purely textual and not per se code. But to answer your question, 110 in the definition is how we have it today. If you have more, feel free, Missy. Yeah, like I love these questions. So yes, and other people feel free to chime in on.
That's all for now from me.
Or this is as much your show as it is mine. So
Nick prepared all the data before starting the stream.
I have some exact data if you really want it in terms of those contributors and then more definitions and even like figuring out like if someone interacts with an issue and the issue gets closed and the issue is linked to a merge request that got merged, that's probably more valuable than an issue that gets closed and there's no link to a merge request. So like all of that stuff is something that we as a team are trying to figure out, like how to add value to something that got added that is not necessarily code. It's one of my passion thingies, I think, here in this role. So.
And just to add on that too, I think part of it is showing the value of community contributions as a whole across the organization. So sometimes other teams, they want to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and we want to be able to show that value that not only are the code contributions important to GitLab as a product, but that contributions to, say, the unification program that we're working on right now, or contributions to the handbook pages, values, contributions to issues, comments, things like that are still contributing to GitLab as a product too. And it doesn't just have to be code contributions. So being able to showcase why and then show that thread of why those contributions have value and carry forward to the rest of the organization is really an important part of what we're doing too.
Okay. Anything else before we move to I think the live pairing, which is like the whole label discussion? Don't hold yourself, Missy. Like, even if you have 10 questions, go for it. So
Maybe during the live pairing, I'm curious about the labels.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one for this group. Because it's yeah, maybe Lee, you can take it away, or Daniel, you did the summary last week of the current status, no?
Yeah, one thing that I found interesting is I was trying to rally the teams together to organize some of these community office hours. One of my primary drivers was that I know the state of our issues isn't great, and I know that if you were to kind of spin the wheel, grab a random issue, the chances are that you wouldn't be able to work on it. You'd look at it and you wouldn't understand what the problem was or what was being asked or how to get started, or I just knew that the quality of issues wasn't very good. And that we weren't being very good at labeling them in such a way that we could easily identify the simpler issues to get started. So I was trying to pull all the different teams together to run these sessions with okay, the team can explain what they do, community can ask some questions, and then the team can actually dive in and maybe curate or triage some issues. So go through and make sure that they are nice and accurate, they're labeled correctly, they've got good implementation plans, and then probably dig in and actually start coding. And it wasn't till last week when we had we had a week without a session booked. So we had about 8 or 9 back-to-back sessions, but then we had this gap. And Nick said, well, why don't we do a session? So it hadn't really stupidly hadn't occurred to me that we should do our own session. But I thought, you know, oh, I should do the same thing. And I had a look, and we actually, interestingly, only have one quick win in our backlog at the moment. And I think I have too many windows open. No, I'm a bit scared of sharing my screen because I've only got one at the moment, but I'll drop the link in the chat, and if someone either wants to share it or just have a look yourselves. But yeah, our team only has one issue marked as a quick win. So I want to sort of take this opportunity to hold my hands up and hold the whole team's hands up and sort of say that, you know, we've got to get better ourselves as well, because we know full well that we've got a huge backlog, we've got hundreds of issues, and we just haven't got capacity to pick it all up. So Nick did a really good job at the beginning of sort of explaining that we're just trying to pick up a few little bits that we think are going to be like efficient uses of our time and have an impact. But for a lot of this other stuff, would be a really good opportunity, I think, for us as a team to go through our backlog and try and identify some of them as quick wins and try and flesh some of them out a little bit. So if anyone from the community does want to chip in, and I think that's definitely something that used to drive me as a community member. I was interested, after contributing for a certain amount of time, in helping other people who are trying to contribute. And that's very much what our team does. So, you know, you, Marco, Nicholas, many others are really interested in already helping us by kind of moving things forward on the triage ops project from an automation point of view, getting involved with discussions for decision making and kind of community or contributor success stuff. So that's something that I'd like us to definitely take away. I'm going to have a quick look. Nick, your screen was prepared for sharing. Do you mind just sharing your screen with that issue?
And I think what I would like as well, but I'm not sure if it's possible, is if you could give like some of a summary of this whole discussion with labels that we had before we dive into maybe a more practical update on that.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So
yeah, I could share this issue, but it's way too long, right? So
do you want to just go to the most recent summary that Daniel popped on there? So I'll rewind as far as I can remember, but Nick, 100%, that so much conversation has taken place that it is hard to remember exactly what and why. The main thing that I remember is we had a label accepting merge requests, and this used to be one of our primary sort of labels that we would suggest community contributors search for. The primary issue with that label was that it suggests that anything that doesn't have that label isn't accepting merge requests. But that wasn't the case. The label was just assigned fairly randomly to issues. So there were probably tens of thousands of issues with that label on, maybe even something like 50% of all issues. So it had become fairly meaningless. So I think that was the first goal, was to just get rid of that label because it really wasn't adding any value. If anything, it was doing the opposite. It was sort of siloing 50% of the issues and kind of getting rid of another 50%. So that was the first kind of decision that was made. We then had, I think it was an apple or a melon, possibly an apple, and it was an emoji. And
an emoji apple, indeed, yeah.
And nobody really knew what it meant. When you looked at the description or somewhere when somebody then explained it to us, it meant low-hanging fruit. which again is I don't know if it's a British or American but it's a sort of cultural phrase which might not mean anything to some people. And yeah, first you've got to translate from this emoji to the phrase, and then you've got to understand what the phrase means. So the clear path forward there was just to use something which is a lot more sort of understandable, interpretable. So we changed that to quick win. So that I think is pretty helpful now. So at least we've got this quick win, which supposedly should mean it's reasonably straightforward for someone to pick up one of those issues.
And I think we also merged good for new contributors with that. So.
You're probably right. Yep, we had good for new contributors as well. So the suspicion is that if something is good for a new contributor, it's probably a quick win. So yeah, so we got rid of accepting merge requests and good for new contributors. But then we at some point introduced seeking community contributions. Again, I don't remember the background as to when and why and how. But with this, it's a bit stricter than the accepting merge requests label. When you add seeking community contributions, our bot will actually say, if you haven't already, please can you add an implementation plan to the issue? So it's a little bit stricter on sort of saying, if you want community contributions for this issue, then please like lay out the implementation plan and make it a little bit easier. We kind of want to go further than that. So looking at Daniel's most recent update, we're reasonably happy with keeping quick win. Personally, I would like to get rid of it and use the issue weight, but I believe that some of the engineering teams, the product teams, use that in specific ways. So we can't do that at the moment. So I'm reasonably happy that we use quick win, but there's a bit of an expectation that a quick win should probably be ready for development. That's a workflow label. So we might want to kind of create an automation or something to say, if it isn't, let's prompt the author or the person who added the quick win label or something like that to say, is this ready for development? And if it isn't, is it really a quick win? It might be that we have an issue that's ready for design or ready for something else that's a quick win. So we need to kind of figure that out a little bit more. Then from a seeking community contributions point of view, our kind of expectation is that we want the community to get involved in whatever the community wants to get involved in. We don't want to say you can contribute to this issue and you can't contribute to this issue. So we want to get rid of that label altogether. And the suggestion is that something that I can't see the label in front of me, but I think it is workflow ready for design or ready for designs. So if you're a designer, then you're probably going to go for stuff that's ready for design, or it might be planning breakdown or something like that. That's fine. You can go for that. If you're more of a developer and engineer, I don't know the perfect terminology, front end, back end, then you're probably going to want something that's workflow ready for development. And there's an expectation there. If something is ready for development, then it should have an implementation plan on there. So again, we'll use the bots if we can to help us to kind of probe the person who added that label, who changed it to that label, to say, hey, like I can't see an implementation plan on there. Could you please add one? Or maybe the other way around, you've added an implementation plan. Do you want to set this to ready for development? So yeah, I guess there's a good opportunity to just open that up for if there's any immediate thoughts. That sounds like a crazy idea, a good idea, a bad idea, or anything to add.
I think it's worth noting on that end too, Lee, that if you scroll through this entire issue, you will see a lot of opinions and disagreements. And the contributor success team, one of our roles here is to try to move things forward and to find some compromises. And another one of GitLab's values is disagree, commit, disagree. So we've had some teams say that they want to use some of these old labels we're trying to get rid of. Some teams want the idea of something specifically labeled for the community and things not. Other teams want to get rid of that. So there's a lot of varying opinions in this whole issue that's been going on for over a year. And so one of the things we decided was that we just have to kind of move this forward a little bit because it's gone on long enough. We do need to take some action here, and we can't satisfy everybody, but we can try to get the ball rolling and get input from the community just to see if something will work. And we can always change it back later or change course if it doesn't work, but we sort of just have to move things forward.
Yeah, with the goal that if someone comes to the GitLab project and wants to be part of the GitLab community, that they're quickly able to find their way in this 50K issues that we have. So I think that's the main goal. There's many other opportunities for us to improve, both what Nico is doing in Cool Summer of Code, some user study that Daniel is leading, and it is also one of these items. But indeed, like any other concerns or thoughts or things that like maybe we didn't think of when Lee was explaining this?
I have a thought. I haven't read through this whole thread, obviously, but just from what we've discussed so far, that was certainly something that I had questions about is after working through all the seeking community contributions or quick wins for a team, then what next? Like what can a community member work on? And it wasn't until you said that you can work on any issue that I realized that, because I thought it really was just scoped to whatever was labeled those things. And it does seem to vary from team to team a bit, but I think highlighting that would be nice for community members to let them know actually you're part of the community, you contribute to anything you want, just check and communicate with people, but it doesn't have to necessarily be scoped only to the quick wins or only to the seeking community contributions. And a question would also be, yeah, what do people work on after quick wins? Is there a secondary label or things that how does that, what do usually people do?
It might be really interesting to understand Marco's perspective, because I'm pretty sure Marco no longer does quick wins, or maybe in the past when Lee was not a GitLab team member, on how you approach that.
You mean you've not seen the what's the opposite of quick? The slow wins label?
So hard and impossible? Maybe we could add a label like that. Yes. So,
well, to be honest, even a quick win after some digging could turn out to be not really a quick win, even if there's an implementation plan and all that's necessary to categorize an issue as a quick win. Because when you start going deep into the code, you can find surprises, to say the least.
But the truth is, Marco, you've got your own agenda, so to speak, right? You've got stuff that you want to work on,
yeah.
That will kind of benefit, I guess, your company, even though a lot of your contributions are in your own time, right?
Yeah. Well, I've actually only worked on existing issues only a few times. For example, the move issues in bulk feature and the time tracking features that I'm working on. But other than that, I personally don't really rely too much on issues, because I mostly work on what I need or what I see while using the product. For example, I have some MRs fixing some UI stuff, layouts that are off. And so, yeah, my contributions are not always related to an existing issue, even if that's for example, sometimes it could still be good to open an issue for an MR if the MR turns out not to be that simple. For example, if you start working on something because you think, okay, this is easy, let's get it done, but later on you realize that, okay, this is one part of it, we shouldn't forget to open an issue. But I'm yeah, maybe I'm not the very best person to talk about working or finding issues, because when I did try to find issues and when somebody asked how to find issues to work on, I relied on what's on the handbook, basically on what it was on the handbook. So good for new contributions, seeking community contributions, and the usual stuff. But now that's changing, and I think that's going to be much easier to use only the quick win label. And when you don't find anything that has the label that you are looking for, try to search for stuff that you're interested in. Even if they're not quick wins, you could even have the expertise to try and get stuff done on that regards.
It's interesting that you mentioned you have a little bit of your own agenda. If we talk to customers, like the thing that we try to uncover is like, what is itching? Or the phrase is then like scratch your own itch. It's the same as having your own agenda, but I feel there's some political vibe to having that you don't have with scratching your own itch in a way.
That just suggests that you're suffering from some kind
you
of disease.
just have something and you want to work on it. And I think this goes back to, if we want this large community where people are here because they believe this is like for them the right place to be, and like the intrinsic why on why are you here is because you're actually able to make a change that benefits yourself in a way, and also others, because you believe that you want to share. Otherwise you just make glue code or you make workarounds and like you're not sharing and you keep it to yourself, and that's that. Many of those examples exist, which is fine. I think the difficulty is like how to explain to others that maybe the itch that they have is this is how you search for something similar, and this is where you can collaborate with others that have that same itch, and then find this common ground where you not solve your itch with your specific like solution, but like solve it in a larger scope. And I believe for sure, like with some things that maybe you did, Marco, or other people did, there might be an issue in these 50,000 issues that talks exactly about that. I'm just not so sure if it's so easily discoverable, or maybe it's not the best experience in going through an issue to then go to a merge request. So for me, this is like an unsolved problem in a way. I'm not entirely sure even how to solve it. In the world I came from, which is the Drupal world, there was no such thing as a separation between a code change and an issue. It was just like a single thing, and all the discussions happened in that single thing. And if it was solved, it was closed. But here we have this, which is also a good thing, but also a bad thing, a separation of an issue and separation of merge requests. And you could start either one individually or independently, and maybe link them afterwards or not. Within GitLab, we prefer merge requests because most of the attention goes to merge requests, including discussions and all of that. So I think that's one of the challenges that we as a contributor success team have, and in extension, the wider community, is like, how can we make that more like a unified process? So yeah, this is more like an open question and not necessarily something we should answer here. But it is challenging, like having 50,000 issues open with not really clear knowing if it was solved or not. That's challenging.
I added a quick note in the doc as well, that when I was fairly early on contributing, I used to quite like browsing the issue list and sorting it by age. So looking at the really, really old issues, there's issues in the issue tracker that are probably 6 or more years old. And obviously something that's been open that long, I think it's bound to have a little bit of a following, and it'll be, you know, make a few people happy if it's fixed or closed or delivered. Similarly, there's issues, and I'd sort by popularity. So again, seeing anything that's got like 100 or more votes, you know, that's going to be something that you know, it will definitely make you feel good and make a lot of other people happy if you're able to solve or deliver on it. or even just pulling together the right people or closing something out because, you know what, this has actually already been delivered, but the issue is still open, or this bug's been fixed, or this feature no longer even exists. So that really kind of goes full circle back around to where Nick and Daniel were talking earlier about the importance of non-code contributions. Like issue housekeeping, let's call it, is really important. And yeah, there's not enough of it. You know, you can tell with 50,000 issues, it's just impossible to kind of stay on top of it. So it would be awesome if we had more, you know, GitLab users that could kind of weren't necessarily developers, coders that wanted to just kind of trawl through issues and find stuff and be like, oh, I'm going to try this and see if this is still broken, or search the docs and see if this is now possible, or even just pull in the right sort of product engineers or product managers and say, hey, like, is this something you want to do? Like, how could, so people can start designing things and planning things and, you know, putting things together, even if they can't build them.
And also there, like, there's two ways of attracting these kind of individuals or yeah, people that want to do this. One is because these people believe that this is indeed very valuable, or two is if we kind of like attach value to it, right? So that kind of like brings us into C as well. Like, can we get awards for people that close 50 issues, like just open questions, right? Or can also people that close 50 or 100 issues in a month become the MVP? Today, that's not within question. Why, like, we are questioning it, obviously, but today, like within the categorization, that's not within the nomination process. But I believe it should be, or I believe like we should also be able to capture that value somehow, and then promote that work and those people. Yeah, probably that's, I think, or I hope, the biggest change that will drive in the next couple of months.
I want to pose a question just to Missy and Nikiu, because I know you've both been recently finding issues to work on and starting MRs. So if you have any feedback on how you found the issues that you've been working on, that's something we're always trying to figure out, not just us as a team telling the community how to do it, but learning from the community how they approach finding issues so that we can try to make that a better experience. So if you had any input on how you found any recent issues, we'd love to hear that.
Cool. So, go on.
Also, there are various ways which I used to.
I'm just going to stop your video to see if it improves your audio.
So,
Don't
so
think.
There are
Yeah, Nick, it seems the internet connection's not really working. If you have a, okay, or if you want to drop it into the chat too, that's also helpful. We can see it in the chat.
That'd be awesome.
Or write it in the document and it persists. I'm not sure if the chat will persist.
Absolutely.
Or other people here that want to answer Daniel's question?
I've been finding issues by using the filters. I found out about the quick wins one like a week or two ago, extremely recently. I was just using the contributor, like seeking community contributions. And then there was another one, good first issue, which I think is like a super old one at this point.
Better add that to our radar.
Yeah, I don't know how many of those are left out there, but now I've switched over to looking for quick wins, and then I've tried to narrow it to one team and then work through all of them on the team so that I get a feel for one area of GitLab and the code base as well. That way it's not so overwhelming dealing with the entire code base. And then I did have the chance of running into something in an issue that I was working on that turned into a bigger thing. Actually, what Lee, you and Marco was probably there when we were looking at the converting the MR list to Vue. And I'm working up to work on that. But first I need to learn Vue. So I'm doing that GraphQL issue to do the Vue component of that one piece. And then eventually I'm hoping to be able to do that. So that wasn't something that was like originally created or scoped as an issue, but in doing other stuff that kind of I walked into it and no one else was working on it. So I'm like, oh, I think I could take that.
Wicked. Well, I'm sure, I know you've been following along and joining the sessions, but obviously Marco's working on converting the fork button from Haml to Vue. Andrew mentioned today that he's working on converting the star button, I think, from Haml to Vue. Now they're, I imagine, a lot simpler than converting the entire merge request app to Vue, but they'd definitely be like, if you want to sort of join them, I'm sure Marco and Andrew will be happy to kind of collaborate with you on getting those over.
Yeah, I actually paused the fork button migration because since there's some interest, I want to do it during our parent sessions, so
cool.
We can record that and everybody can see.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got to work up to it, but I'm building up to that larger issue and that larger piece of work with the smaller pieces.
Quite larger.
Yeah.
Cool.
Are there any like random other questions from topics that we did not discuss before, like we go over like other items that we added, as in like we as GitLab team members added? Like things you want to discuss, things you want to see changed.
I would be curious to know if teams have time on a regular basis to scope out quick wins, because it seems like sometimes every time there's a hackathon, it seems like things get curated a bit more and there's a few things, but then there's been a number of times that I open a quick win and it has no implementation plan. And then there's a thread of comments saying, can you please add an implementation plan, but it's not added yet.
I think that goes back to exactly why I started these sessions up, to try and highlight that problem. And as I say, it's kind of also highlighted that our teams know better than the other teams, and we need to do that as well. But yeah, I think that the answer is essentially no, that everyone knows that community is like an essential part of GitLab. But I don't think, or I think very few have got something scheduled into their calendars to kind of revisit their issues list and kind of do housekeeping on it. There's reports that come out every week for new issues. So we've got a bot that uses some level of machine learning, artificial intelligence to try and label new issues with the correct group. And then that group, the engineering manager, maybe the product manager of that group, then has visibility and tries to kind of do the initial triaging. You know, is it a bug? Is it a feature request? And, you know, decides where to go from there. But once that's happened, once that initial triaging has happened, I think it kind of goes into a bit of a black hole, or just a humongous pot. So yeah, that's something that I'd really love to find a way that we can really kind of emphasize and it become more of a kind of KPR or a like we have KRs like key results or something that, you know, all teams should always have a certain number of quick wins or issues with clear implementation plans or something. And the idea is to try and make it, because at the moment it feels like I'm saying, can you do this for us, please? But the kind of flip side is that if they want people to contribute and they want wider community contributors to do their work for them, then they should do this. And, you know, hopefully your kind of case in point where you've picked some issues, picked a team that have got a really nice curated list of quick wins, and you're kind of working your way through them. So, you know, that they might want to keep quiet about that because they might want to just keep curating their own issues. But hopefully if they can celebrate that, then, you know, the other teams will kind of realize the value, and that actually, you know, an hour a week or whatever it might take for them to invest and spend some time on some issue housekeeping would be really, really well spent.
I'm also curious if even the implementation plan like could be done by community members, right? So in a way, you don't, or we need to figure out how to unblock basically ourselves from like some of these teams. Some might need an approval for sure to even proceed. That doesn't mean that we cannot cultivate or get a culture of suggesting implementation plans or figuring out how to unblock community members themselves. And this is somewhat of a tricky problem because the nature of the open source project or of GitLab itself is indeed the open core. So there's always some part of that friction happening there. But finding that balance without like being too much blocked on these teams have to create all of these issues. I would love to figure out like where that balance is and move a bit more towards, yeah, even like bias for action, even for implementation plans, and recognize that work, right?
I think that reiterates what I said earlier about if we get rid of seeking community contributions, we then have many contributors that would be focusing on workflow ready for development. But I also mentioned that we would have some contributors that would be focusing on workflow planning breakdown or workflow ready for design, where they would be the ones that could potentially help to put that implementation plan or those designs together.
Yeah, and that brings like the whole collaboration even more into the picture. So like instead of cheering for the single MR author, like cheer for a team, right?
Exactly. Then that adds more complexity to Nick's algorithm, where he's got to find a way that to reward the person that puts the implementation plan together with bonus points as well.
Yeah, so like, I don't think we'll be able to give you an overview of that plan in 5 minutes, but maybe for those that are interested, like read that Amar. Like I think there's also like what is it? Here.
But one question I would have is, if I build an implementation plan, why shouldn't I just implement it directly in the code? If I look how to implement it, then I could theoretically just implement it myself directly and save the time to write an implementation plan and just do the implementation.
That's true if you could do it all yourself, but I think if you're looking to collaborate or maybe get feedback on is this the right approach, then it probably makes perfect sense to like get some feedback on that implementation plan and in effect just have it out there, and then for others to pick up could be a great help as well. So it depends. Like if it's an itch that you have and you urgently have to scratch it, sure, go ahead and fix it. Like there's no reason why you should wait. But I think if looking at it from a bigger picture, if you could help someone else by doing this and get recognized for it, and you're not in an urgent pressure for some reason, I think it would make total sense to write it down.
I think that's it, and it's a bit more reactive at the moment, right? Someone comes to Discord and asks, you know, they need help solving an issue, and Nicholas, yourself, or Marco, or me, or Daniel, or Raymond, or someone will often jump on and help try and look at the issue, understand it, and break it down and add an implementation plan. Perfect example, I think it was the session last week, maybe we stumbled on one that was marked for quick win, and it was a follow-up issue potentially from a merge request that Marco raised months, maybe a year ago, whatever. And, you know, I asked Marco kindly and he added an implementation plan. But, you know, if you think about, yes, I know a lot of effort and work and time does go into kind of figuring out who and what and where and putting these together. But at the same time, I think you probably could, you know, easily do maybe 5 times as many, if not 10 times as many implementation plans, then you could actually have capacity of delivering, going through the review process back and forward, etc. So there does come a point where yeah, maybe you're juggling too many merge requests and you just want to step back from coding and jumping from project to project and just kind of sit and yeah, put some implementations together and help some people.
Yeah, that issue was probably a perfect example, because I spent almost 1 hour trying to write that implementation plan, because I had to look at the code and find where the changes would need to be made. And thinking it later on, I could have just made the changes, but I didn't have, since I don't have the time to put together the changes, the specs, the MR, and all that stuff. Okay, I spent 1 hour writing the implementation plan so that if someone's looking for something to do, they can do it.
And maybe the last thing on that, like writing these implementation plans is a great way of teaching someone else.
Yeah.
And how to think or how to understand complexity. So it scales and even helps others. So it's more from an helping hand than from probably helping yourself. And you have to figure out like what works for you. If it's not if it doesn't give you any joy of doing that, you probably like shouldn't do that as well.
And writing implementation plans is not really easy, because maybe you think that you know the product, so you know where the changes might end up being, but if you then try to have a look, then maybe it's not like that. And that issue that I looked the other week was another perfect example, because I was sure all the changes, all the quick action, the mutations, and the REST API, they are all calling the update service. So we could just make a change on the update service, but that's not really the case. But I only found that by looking at the code to write the implementation plan.
All right, I think we're at the end of the office hours, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's
we are indeed.
Yeah.
We didn't write any line of code.
Maybe that's okay for this kind of.
So I can say like a bit of a cheat, and the half hour that we might have wanted to spend coding, you can watch the pairing from this morning, which Missy, I know you were there anyway. But we were working half of the time on creating a new webhook for reactions, for awarding emoji reactions to notes and issues, merge requests, etc., which is potentially something that we need in order to kind of get data for
MR
this.
feedback.
Yeah, MR feedback is a great example, but also for this kind of pointsy scoring sort of system, which I know is a sort of interesting topic, and it's not the answer to all our problems. But you know, if we can start seeing like hot issues, hot merge requests, and you know someone's activity, it can be really helpful to kind of get behavior and yeah, definitely. We said earlier that we want to start picking, I'm going to call them contributor of the month, as opposed to MVP, but you know, people that are exhibiting that the right behavior, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily someone that's delivering the most merged MRs.
Right. That's a good way to close this office hours, I think, and hopefully, if we do this again in a couple of months, we'll have made some progress there.
Absolutely.
With your help.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for joining. You know where we are if you've got any other questions, and hopefully see you at one of the next office hours.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.